Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Eric Stevens drove carefully home on the evening of November 8th. If he got a traffic ticket, he would pay it, but the others in his office might find out anyway. When you prosecute in traffic court, a ticket could be an embarrassment. With the weather blustery and wet, driving carefully was a good idea, anyway. When he got to his apartment, the answering machine was blinking. The third message was from Cassandra. They were in choir together, and he was godfather to one of her sons. Eric, this is Cassandra Palmer. I've something related to your job. Could you call me at home after 5? Thanks. Why me, he thought. Everybody in Chicago had a friend who could fix things. Want a tree removed from in front of your house, or a pothole fixed? You didn't call the city. You spoke to a friend who had a friend who could get the job done. Well, if a cop fixed a traffic ticket, it was a minor offense even if someone interested in stopping it found out. If a prosecutor fixed a traffic ticket, it was a conflict of interest violation of legal ethics. Guys did it, but he knew he'd be caught if he did it. When there was no other way out, he paid his friends fines rather than take the risk of fixing their tickets. He just hoped it wasn't something serious that required a court appearance. You couldn't just pay the fine. Well, he called Cassandra, and she answered. Who is the issue? Nothing like that, she said. I have a student in class who was attacked. She needs to talk with somebody. She's hesitant to involve the police, but she said okay when I said I knew somebody in the state's attorney's office. Why me? He was in the state's attorney's office, but not in the section that handled those cases. Attacked in class? That didn't sound possible. Your class? No. She's in my class 3 days a week, but she wasn't there when it happened. Apparently, it was after a school event. That sounded more possible, if less straightforward to handle. When did this happen? He asked. Saturday, she said. Ouch. You want it handled soon? Tonight? He might not prosecute assault cases, but he had heard gossip from those who did. The ideal case was simple. Clear evidence, witnesses, and a straightforward suspect. I don't think I could get her tonight. Tomorrow? I'll serve you some dinner. In twin time? He asked. Might as well get something out of it. That's no problem. Tomorrow, Bill will go to the finance committee meeting. Bill tended to prefer dealing with the kids himself. Cassandra was always willing to have somebody else deal with them. Okay. 6. Thanks, Eric. I owe you one. Or he owed her one less. Tuesday, he considered raising the issue with Margaret Murphy, the head prosecutor for assaults. He didn't, however, have any firm information, even the name. He'd speak to Murphy when he could tell her something. He left the office on the dot. When he got to the Palmer home, he couldn't see which cars, if any, were in the garage. He parked on the street instead of blocking the driveway. Before he got to the door, though, he heard kids' screams. That sounded like Bill was home. He rang the bell, and Bill came to the door while carrying John upside down. State's attorney's office, he said. We have reports of serious child abuse here. Well, Bill said, they abuse us horribly, but nobody here is serious. He came in and closed the door. This is Miss Wharton. Cassandra had said that she had a student, and she'd said that the student had been assaulted. She hadn't said that the student was a stunning beauty. Eric Stevens. I'm sorry for the humor. I didn't know you were here yet. I'm Paul's godfather, as well as the position you've heard about. He was babbling, and he hung his parka in the closet to hide his confusion. Well, there were the boys as a focus of attention to avoid the other problems. Soon, there was a dinner, too. Bill sat at the head of the table. Cassandra, as usual, sat with her back to her picture, and the boys sat between them. Miss Wharton sat between Bill and him. She had a lovely profile, and she turned her attention from the food to the kids and back again. She barely looked at him. After Bill left for the meeting of the finance committee, he took the boys into the downstairs John to wash their hands. Then they all sat on the sofa to read some books. Miss Wharton stayed to help Cassandra clear. Then they both came in to watch him and the boys. Finally, Cassandra called time. The boys kissed him goodnight, and then kissed Miss Wharton goodnight. He was a little jealous of them. Miss Wharton called the boys by name. A lot of people got them confused. It seemed to him that it was more myth than experience. They're twins, so there is no way to tell them apart. There were all sorts of ways to tell them apart, even physically. Behaviorally, it was even easier. His godson was the leader. He kissed Miss Wharton first, which meant that he saw that kiss as desirable. Well, Uncle Eric agreed. She wants me down here before the conversation gets serious, Cassandra said. Well, they should discuss something else while the boys dawdled. Have you always been such a beauty? Might not be appropriate. He finally thought of something. Well, without getting into anything substantial, maybe I could get some background. You're a student of Mrs. Palmer? Yeah, freshman economics. You're a freshman? Yeah, she said. 18. The age of the victim, especially a teenage victim, was important in assault cases. That wasn't a personal question. 19. I had my birthday this September. You're a state's attorney? Finally, an answer which didn't feel like pulling teeth. And, while it was generally more polite to talk about the girl than about himself, she probably dreaded the talking about herself which would come up all too soon. An assistant state's attorney. The state's attorney is Cary. Illinois is divided into judicial districts, most of them covering more than one county. Cook is nearly half the state, population-wise, and the district court is about the largest court of first instance in the nation. The state's attorney's office handles all the prosecutions for any criminal cases in the county, not counting federal prosecutions. He was sounding like a civics text, but he didn't know what else to say. We go from parking tickets to murder. There are one hell of a lot of us, and we mostly specialize. I don't handle. She had specifically asked to avoid the subject of assault until Cassandra came back. That is to say, I prosecute traffic cases. What else was there to say? When I'm not in the office, I sing in the church choir with Mrs. Palmer and in Godfather to Paul. She wasn't going to help. Maybe he should read Horton to her until Cassandra got back. What other courses do you take? He asked finally. She looked comfortable answering his factual questions as long as he stayed off the recent past. Finally, Cassandra started down the stairs. Well, how should the questioning be set up? They well didn't want Miss Wharton. What was her name anyway? Facing a panel consisting of Cassandra and himself. Look, you want her present. Do you want her close? He asked. She nodded. Why don't you and she take the sofa while I get a chair? When he was well away from the sofa, she went to it. He got a dining room chair and sat in it. Cassandra sat down far enough from Miss Wharton to establish the latter's independence, but close enough to be available. Look, he began, this is painful. I know it, but it's not going to get less painful with more delay. Mrs. Palmer tells me that you were assaulted, he continued. Tell me about it. I was stupid. That was the wrong way to begin. She was blaming herself, and the defense, in the unlikely chance that this got to trial, would be blaming her. She should start out blaming the perp. You are a college freshman, he explained. That's not being stupid. It might be being less cautious than an older woman might be. That's not the point. Where were you? Who was with you? What did he do? Start where you want. If I need more details, I'll ask for them. I was at a dance with this boy. He had taken me there on a date. On the way home, he invited me to his apartment for a drink. I said yes. Anyway, one thing led to another. We were making out. I wanted him to stop, but he wouldn't. He could picture it, but she hadn't articulated the key details. Did you tell him to stop? When? He asked. When he took my panties off and my pantyhose. He could see it, and he wished he couldn't. He ignored me. Then, later, I found that he was naked, too. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. He wouldn't stop? No. You told him to stop? That was one of the requirements. Yes, she answered. There was intercourse? He was inside you? Yes. Okay, that's assault. Unless, of course, you're married to him. I'm not. She was serious. He'd been too lawyerly. I didn't think you were. It's just the law. If you don't like that, write your state legislator. Anyway, you've been saying, what was his name? Jerry Lambert. BMOC, Cassandra said suddenly. Like Professor Palmer says, he's important. She started to tear up. Well, he had enough to take to Murphy. He wouldn't push her, except maybe for her first name. But she didn't know he wasn't going to push. She cried and Cassandra held her. After a bit, Cassandra looked like she was shielding the girl from him. Look, he said, I'm not the enemy. I didn't say you were. No, but Mama Bear was protecting you from me. Anyway, this isn't the end. Did you report this to the police? No. Well, Murphy would talk to her on what he had. Speaking of a Mama Bear, that woman might appear for the state, but she felt like the advocate for the victims. Well, this girl needed an advocate. Well, you're going to have to tell this all over again. At least you'll be telling it to a woman. Can I make an appointment for you? If you have to. Look, I repeat, I'm not the enemy. This enough, Jerry is. Nothing's going to happen to him if you hide yourself away. We're not putting you through this because we're evil. He's putting you through this because of what he did, and because that's the only way that he'll suffer at all. Anyway, I know the woman at the state's attorney's office you should talk to. I don't know whether she's on trial tomorrow. How do I get in contact with you? And when? Are you going to be home tomorrow? I don't want to be home. I haven't told Mom. This didn't sound good. Well, sometime, you'll have to. Why don't you give me your phone number, and when you'll be home tomorrow? We'll assume an appointment sometime Thursday. I'll call you tomorrow night with the time and the room number. You know the county building? It's really the same building as City Hall, only we have the east side. She wrote down the information she asked for and handed it to him. He checked it out of habit before pocketing it. It was a phone number and evening times. Take my work phone too. He gave her his card. That way, if you call me in the early afternoon, you can learn the appointment without my calling you and raising questions at home. Anyone want more dessert? Cassandra asked. Cassandra wanted to end this, and who could blame her? He wasn't sure how to offer Miss Warden a ride home. Somehow, Cassandra said, I don't think this is the night to suggest a few hands of gin rummy. She was being really heavy-handed, but Miss Wharton probably needed it. You have been awfully kind already, the girl said. I could drive you home, he said. Really, I can. She was scared of him. He should defuse that as much as possible. I won't take it personally if you would rather ride in the back seat. You have a damned good reason to be off, men, but don't think of me as a man. Think of me as a driver. That got her moving. When she got outside, though, she went to the front seat. She was named Clara, and she lived in Belmont Cragen. He got on the road west, figuring to turn south at Central. Then it was time for more conversation. He decided that the Cassandra he knew was too distant from the Cassandra she knew. The kids seemed safe, and they both liked them. Besides, she'd separated herself from the herd there. You really can tell the kids apart? He asked. Or was that a lucky guess? I can tell them apart when they're both present and standing still. Can't you? That's the easy part. And they're seldom standing still, as you might have noticed. I can tell them apart. It's just that lots of people can't. After all, I'm Paul's godfather. I can't wait till the boys see the movie. I'll hear about it then. As I said, the hard part is getting them to stand still. She said, you seem to have had no problem getting to stand still, sit still, for their books. Professor Palmer seems proud of them. And that was an understatement. She is. She has been from their birth, if also a tiny bit overwhelmed. You saw the picture? She'd been sitting facing it for the meal. Bill had taken Cassandra to the portrait studio with her doctoral robes and the twins. Yeah, she wrote her dissertation while carrying twins. He told her. Bill is proud as punch about that accomplishment. Those accomplishments. Bill was notorious in the church for cuddling other people's babies. Then she gave him 2 of his own. He hasn't quite given up other people's infants, but he is still a hands-on parent. I may tease him about abuse, but the boys not only love him, they love his treatment of them. Yeah, he was holding them upside down when you came. Cassandra, that wasn't a good name to use when talking to a student. You call her Professor Palmer, don't you? She nodded. Professor Palmer actually prefers a gentler approach. The boys enjoy the playful energy, though. They often try to get me to lift them up, but I don't trust my strength enough. They wiggle excitedly while bent over the floor. Theologically, I'm supposed to have a special relationship with Paul. Actually, I try to treat both boys equally. Sometimes, he would spin one boy gently while holding him upright. That was the extent of his physical interaction. They knew he was better at reading books to them. They continued chatting pleasantly. The conversation went well, all things considered, and the trip was uneventful. Parking was scarce on Fletcher, her street, so he walked her to her door. That night, he had a strange dream about Clara. It unsettled him, but he shrugged it off by morning and went about his day. Before heading to court, he managed a brief talk with Miss Murphy. Last night, I spoke with the victim of an unreported assault. I promised her I'd arrange an interview with you. When? Murphy asked. The assault happened Saturday, most likely Saturday night. She should have reported it earlier. Do you know what a defense attorney would make of that? I know, he said. She definitely should have taken advice of counsel. These girls never take lawyers along on their dates. I can't see why. Murphy glared, but then she relented. She wouldn't piss on him if he were on fire, but she would go out of her way for any victim. Okay, I'll see her. At least, we can get it reported. You know what's hell? The best thing that you can do to lower assault occurrences is to get them reported. Getting them reported raises assault statistics. Politicians are loath to do that, for obvious reasons. I'll see when today I can clear my schedule. I'm not in good contact with her. Can you look on your schedule for tomorrow? Don't you have a phone for her? Murphy asked. She's a student and at college now. Circle. I have her home phone. She's skittish as hell. Yeah, the victims feel a lot more guilt than the perps. Now Murphy was putting Miss Whalen among her victims. Well, I haven't seen the perp. She's feeling guilt and shame and fear and anger. I didn't see any, he said. Clara was a good woman and a frightened girl. He would have been happier to see some anger. He gave Murphy what he had, including Clara's address and phone. When he got back from court to the office to eat his lunch, the time of the Thursday appointment was on his desk. Clara called soon thereafter. She said that she would keep the appointment. Sunday, Cassandra and he didn't discuss the matter in choir. He still hadn't heard anything about Clara. When he got back from court Tuesday, he decided to ask. The woman cop outside Murphy's office said she had a negotiation with a defense attorney. She'd tell Murphy that he wanted to talk with her and call when she was available. The call came about 5:20. The sex crime section worked late more often than traffic did, but he got caught up on some reports while he waited. Sorry to keep you, Margaret, he said, but I started this, and I wanted to know how it came out. Is there anything you can tell me about the Wharton case? There is now no Wharton case. The perp denied it, claimed consent. You believed him? I never talked to him, Murphy said. You know the issue isn't what I believe, but what I can prove. I'd catch hell if I went before a grand jury with this. But you believed her? What wasn't to believe? She said she went back to his apartment with him. She drank with him. She had foreplay with him. Look, we don't see many false claims. Maybe daddy comes home too soon, and darling daughter tells him it was assault. But that doesn't get to the cops, much less here. There is damn little upside for a false police report of assault. And if a woman is going to lie about it, she'd lie about saying no much earlier than this woman claims to have said no. Yeah, her first words to me were that she'd been stupid, he told Murphy. Yeah, truer words were never spoken. Hell of it is, what she described sounded smooth. It wasn't fumbling, which didn't stop soon enough. It sounded like the perp had planned to assault her. Probably. I put that too brutally, but he planned to have sex with her, willing or not. Had considered how to deal with her unwillingness. Now, if I can't prove assault with him denying it, I sure can't prove that degree of premeditation. She doesn't even allege it, and if she did, she wouldn't have any grounds. Smooth operator. She? Traffic is all. Your section. If the guy was a serial assaulter, he hadn't been reported before. For all the pain that Clara had gone through reporting him, that would be one thing she had done. That's part of why we can't take it to the grand jury. No priors. He took her home afterwards. He did? He asked. She had been skittish with him. Smart perp. Girl had been assaulted. She was in a section of town she didn't know. It was after midnight. Her choice was accepting his ride or catching a bus. Were the buses in that neck of the woods still running? If so, where were they? If she was carrying cab fare, she still would have had to find a cab in a strange neighborhood that might not, for all she knew, have many cabs. He offered, and she accepted, but played defense attorney with that fact. Now, Miss Wharton, you say that you and Mr. Lambert had sex late Saturday night or early Sunday morning. After that sex, did Mr. Lambert drive you home? About how long after the sex act would you say that you got in his car with him? The jury, assuming we got an indictment, would never believe she'd been assaulted. Well, thanks. For what? And I should thank you for what? You did the right thing. At least sitting on it would have been the wrong thing. But it's not going to do the perp any harm unless a second girl reports him. I heard one more sad story I'm not going to be able to do anything about. He left Murphy to her bitterness and drove home. He was fairly bitter himself. The prettiest girl he'd seen in a long while, the prettiest girl he'd really met as an adult, was now out of his life. And she was frightened of him, had good cause to be frightened of men. He had her address and phone number, but not the slightest excuse for calling her. Thursday night, he got back from court to find a note. Cassandra had called from her office. He called back. Economics, Professor Palmer. Cassandra? Eric. They said you were on trial. I didn't even know that you'd been arrested. It means involved in the courtroom. Not only defendants are on trial, so are counsel. Was he being pedantic? Anyway, what's going on at your end with the Clara Wharton deal? Cassandra asked. I'll tell you, somebody's throwing some weight around at my end. Are you feeling the heat there, too? No. Get some perspective. Things can get fixed. This was Cook County. A Thompson relative, even a Daly relative despite the politics, was likely to walk. But a basketball star of a second-rate basketball school? He might well be a big man on campus, as you said. He's not a big man in the county. Fixing an assault is as hard as fixing a murder, maybe harder considering Miss Murphy. Anyway, there is no reason for anyone to throw his weight around. She spoke to Murphy, and then she filed a police report. The perp denied it, and there wasn't much else the cops could do. Some people are bad witnesses, and Clara is one. They didn't believe her? That wasn't what he'd said, and that wasn't what he wanted her to believe. In the first place, she should believe Clara. Clara needed her. In the second place, if she thought that the state's attorney's office was doubting Clara, Clara might get the message and think that he doubted her. Oh, that is to say Murphy, believed her implicitly. What she didn't believe is that she could convince a jury. Some very bad people are good witnesses. Some very good people are bad witnesses. Anyway, there is a police report on file. The next time he assaults some woman, the cops will pull the file and know that neither report is bogus. He was putting the best angle he could on the null pros. It was little enough compensation for what Clara went through reporting the crime. Assuming, of course, that the next woman reports it. Cassandra had hit the nail on the head. Yeah, Murphy thought that he was a repeat offender, and Clara was just the first girl brave enough to come forward. This was, however, speculation. She would never go to the grand jury with that. Eric went through the weekend and the next week without hearing anything about Clara. No news, no messages, nothing. By Wednesday, he had Clara's phone number out in front of him. He had no real reason to call, but he stared at it for an hour before putting it away. That night, he had a vivid, unsettling dream about the assault, waking up sweaty and shaken. On Sunday, Clara was at church. Cassandra hadn't been in choir, and Gladys mentioned a guest attending. From the choir loft, Eric saw Clara with Bill and some other women. One looked like her from a distance. After the service, Eric stopped to confirm it was really her. The boys called out to him as he passed. Paul reached for his hand to swing him around. "You're in your church clothes, and so am I," Eric said. "This isn't the time or place." "I owe you an explanation," Eric told Clara. "Let me return my robe to the choir room, then I'll drive you home. I can explain on the way." "We're taking her to lunch," said one of the women, Claire, a grad student he'd seen at coffee hour. "Well, I can do that," Eric said, ready to take Clara to lunch. But Clara turned to Claire. "You're?" she asked. "There are 3 of us," Claire said, indicating herself and 2 other women with Cassandra and Bill, one named Jane, another grad student, and a third Eric didn't know. "Thanks, Clara," Claire said. "Sorry," Clara said to Eric, though her tone didn't sound very apologetic. Eric watched them leave and swapped his robe for his parka. Well, that plan didn't work out. Still, he'd made it clear he wanted to explain things. Maybe he could call her. But if he did, she'd want the explanation over the phone. And if he called just to arrange a meeting, she might think he wanted the meeting more than to explain. The next Sunday, Clara was back at church. He didn't see her from the choir loft and almost missed her. Normally, he left through the basement's outside entrance with others without family waiting upstairs. But the outside was muddy, so he went up the inside stairs, and there she was, waiting for him. She looked startled when he greeted her, probably expecting Cassandra, who was busy with family upstairs. Eric was glad to handle Clara's greeting. "Miss Wharton," he said, finishing the stairs. "I still owe you an explanation. Do you have plans this afternoon?" He wondered if Joan would invite her to lunch again. The 2 women exchanged glances. "Well, if you have something to tell me," Clara said. "That was acceptance. Now to put it into practice. Wait here. My car's 2 blocks away, and the weather's awful." He retrieved the car and turned on the heat, then drove back to the church. The loading zone was busy, so he waited for Charlie as his family climbed into the sedan. Then he pulled into the spot and went to Clara. She was already at the door, walking toward him. He opened the door for her and started driving, gathering his thoughts. "Just a second," he said. The traffic was slow but steady as he headed north and stopped at a light. "The short answer," he began, "is that the office has decided not to prosecute." She didn't believe him. Her voice was ashamed, as if this was another kind of punishment, not just from the legal system, but from him too. "Miss Murphy believed you 100%. "What?" she asked me. "Is there to disbelieve? What she doesn't believe is that she could convince a jury. And, to be fair to the jury, they're supposed to require evidence beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt. You say one thing, the perp says something else, and unless all 12 are convinced beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt, the perp walks." "Perp?" she asked. He'd been using the office term. "Sorry, professional jargon. Perpetrator, the guy who did it. Anyway, do you eat Chinese?" If Claire could take her to lunch, so could he. She was thinking, not rejecting it, but not accepting it yet. He doubted that she would have accepted faster if he'd said Italian. "I gave you the short answer. There is a longer one, and you deserve it." "Well," another long pause. "Thank you." So he got them to the restaurant. She was out of the car before he came around, but she let him seat her at the restaurant. The order was a more comfortable topic for both of them, but his excuse for the time with her was his report. "Okay," he resumed when they had ordered. "The perp said it was consensual. Do we believe it? Does Miss Murphy believe it?" "Not by a long shot. But what lawyers believe and what they can prove are 2 very different things. What should I have done differently?" She was still feeling guilty. Murphy was probably right. She was feeling guiltier than the scumsucker was. Aside from not going on a date with the guy in the first place, you should have definitely acted on legal advice. He was trying to show her how ridiculous her guilt was. If you'd had a lawyer with you on the date, he would have told you that when you said no, you should have screamed it. At least the second time you said no should have been a scream. When you got up and got dressed, you should have knocked on all the doors of other apartments and asked them to call the police. You knock on a stranger's door late at night, and they're reluctant to let you in. They'll usually call the police. "I'll be blunt," he continued. "It wasn't Clara's fault. It was the scumsucker's fault, and it was a little the police's fault, too. You're robbed and you report it the next morning, they'll investigate. You're assaulted and you report it later, the police are more reluctant to act. In that, for all you waited too long, for all that I'm a weird guy to talk to, you finally got to Miss Murphy. An ASA asks the cops to investigate, and they investigate. And, from her standpoint of course, there's always the chance that the perp will break down. I didn't mean to do it. I don't know what came over me. I'm terribly sorry. The weird thing is that the guys with consciences are serving time while your sort of perp is walking. My sort? Not her sort of perp. Well, the guy who attacked you. Others like him. Okay, let's get this more general. You ever watch a TV show with a murder trial? Yeah, she answered. Well, in any prosecution, you have to prove 2 things. You have to prove that the crime occurred, and you have to prove that the defendant did it. Usually, not always. One of those is a piece of cake. The TV shows don't handle the dull part. The guy is blown nearly in half by a sawed-off shotgun. The ASA calls witnesses to testify that the guy is dead and that the death was violent. The defense attorney says, "No questions, Your Honor." Date assault. The issue is whether there was a crime. The victim has misidentified my client as the guy with whom she had the date. Isn't likely to fly. You know who you attended the dance with? Yeah, she was agreeing with something. Maybe that she knew who she dated. So, he has two chances, he continued. He can claim that no sexual relations occurred, or he can claim that they were consensual. The first has all sorts of possible problems. He doesn't know what you did after you left him. So, the smart perp goes with the second. He might have had legal advice, though I doubt it. Generally, you don't quite tell your lawyer that you did the crime. Most of them know, but you don't tell him. If they know, don't they have to tell? Not really. Lawyer-client confidentiality. On the other hand, there are ethical problems with bringing somebody to the witness stand when you know that he is lying. So, you tell your client to not tell you outright. If you can produce someone to testify that you were somewhere else when the robbery occurred, that will counteract the eyewitnesses. Somebody who knows you well. So there is an alibi. You haven't told him to lie about the alibi, but you wouldn't bet on the accuracy, either. Sounds cynical, Clara said. Is cynical. Prosecutors play defense lawyer all the time, but we don't like them. On the other hand, they don't like us, either. And the rest of the world doesn't like any lawyer. I practice corporate law, but I tell my kids I'm a pimp, so they won't be ashamed of me. You have children? That had been a lawyer joke, and she hadn't got two. He definitely spent too much of his time with lawyers. No, and I don't practice corporate law either. That was a silly joke. Sorry. Then the food came, and they talked about that. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, she said after the meal. Well, he was still Mr. Stevens. He'd had one meal with her. That meal had used up his excuse, and he really doubted that he could make up another. She was happy talking about the twins, but she would think him weird to suggest a meeting to discuss them. Go for broke. He didn't have anything to lose but his chains. Look, as I said, the case isn't going forward, right? Yeah, that means you don't have any business with the state's attorney's office anymore. No. So, you don't have any business with Mr. Stevens. He took a deep breath. Do you think you could call me Eric? Thanks, Eric. And Eric got less formal wording than Mr. Stevens did. Well, push forward. I know you're not the greatest fan of the male sex right now. Do you think that you might be ready to go out to eat with a guy sometime? And the guy you have in mind? She got it. Yeah, I was thinking of me. You already had one meal with me, and I didn't crawl over the table to attack you. While she had reason to fear and distrust men, he was somewhat safer. On the other hand, she went to a school full of guys closer to her age and interests. On the other, maybe the third, hand, she didn't know how the younger guy would react to the news she'd been assaulted. She didn't have to worry about telling him. Is this because you think? Shit. She thought he was setting her up. That was the other side of not having to tell him. He knew, and she thought he was judging her as a fallen woman. Did women fall in 1979? I might not be the brightest guy in the world, he said, but I'm not a total idiot, either. If I were after sex, you would be the last woman in the world I'd pursue. Nuns and married women would be more available. I know that. It's just that you're quite attractive. I feel a total heel pressing you right now. I know I met you for the absolutely wrong reason, but I did meet you. You came into my life. If you're going to go out of it, it's well not going to be because I didn't try. She didn't respond. He'd lost her, but he'd never really had a chance with her. Now, I've upset you, he finished. He'd ended his statement. Had he ended the relationship? Well, no, she said. It's not about you. I'm just not ready yet. That was clear enough. I'll tell you what. I don't want to become a burden. That's something you don't need right now, and honestly, it rarely ends well. He was trying to find a way forward. Sometimes you go to Aldersgate. Why don't I give you my card again? I'll write my home phone on it. The next time you want to go to church, if you want to ride, just call me. I'm busy with work most days, but usually home in the evenings, and the answering machine will pick up if I'm not. She didn't say yes, but when he wrote his home number on the back of a card and handed it to her, she took it. He walked her to her door, watching from the bottom of the porch stairs as she entered and closed the door behind her. That was closing the door on him, probably forever. That night, she appeared again in his dreams. That would probably be their relationship from now on. She'd be present in his mind, but not in his real life. Eric Stevens did not have much excitement in his life. He worked in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, which prosecuted about half the crimes which went to trial in the state of Illinois. Some of his colleagues prosecuted murderers, narcotic dealers, or perpetrators of intricate frauds. Eric was one of the guys who prosecuted traffic cases. He sang in the choir at Aldersgate, and the former choir director had made a habit of asking every possible singer in the choir to sing a solo at least once a year. She had never asked Eric for a solo, and he couldn't blame her. He had gone on dates in high school and college. The sex ratio at Kent College of Law was too unbalanced to leave any women students who had to settle for Eric. After figuring out the system after law school, he'd had dates, and even 2 affairs. What he'd never had was a romance. Girls had found him boring. Women found him boring. He, when he was honest with himself like now, found himself boring. And the women who would give him more than a passing glance tended to be boring, too. Actually, interesting women were willing to be friends with him, as long as the friendship was totally platonic. Cassandra Palmer, for instance, was pretty, buxom, bright enough to have earned a Ph.D., and sexy enough to marry a guy whom she claimed had no good qualities outside of bed. Cassandra was enough of a friend to have asked him to be godfather to Paul, one of her twins. And Cassandra had introduced him to Clara. Clara was a student of Cassandra's. What was more important was that Clara was a great beauty, and Clara needed help he could give. Suddenly, Eric's life wasn't boring anymore. Unfortunately, the reason Clara needed his help was that she had been assaulted, and he could introduce her to the woman in the state's attorney's office who ran the section dealing with assault. So the first beautiful woman to know he was alive was now afraid of men. Cassandra had brought her to church to get some support from some young women, and he had tried to prolong the acquaintance by offering her rides. She, however, hadn't come back after 2 visits. 1979 was drawing to a close. It was already December 15th. The calendar would say that he had lived 30 years next March 29th. The truth was, however, that he hadn't lived at all. Then the phone rang. Eric Stevens speaking. "Mr. Stevens, this is Clara." It was, and his week was looking better already. "Hello, Clara. Nice of you to call. Is there something I can do for you? Please say yes. If, on the other hand, you merely called to chat, that would be great, too. I know it's late." "Not at all. I don't go to bed for hours yet." And he would be happy to have her wake him up, but he shouldn't come on too strong. He should keep this light. "Well, it isn't late to talk, but it's late to ask for a ride to church." Not really, though had she called earlier, he wouldn't have been in the funk he was in this evening. "Not too late. Your place? I mean pick you up at your place? Let's see, church starts at 11 o'clock. I don't like the driving conditions. Let's say half an hour. Leave your place at 10:30. Is that okay with you?" "That would be fine. Is there anything else you want me to do? I mean come in and meet your folks? Would they want to know who their daughter was driving off with?" But he was thinking of high school rules, and Clara was a college student. His college dates hadn't lived at home. "No. Can you be in front of the door and still in your car at 10:30? "Sure. Though he might block the street if there were no parking spaces. I might have to circle the block, but I'll be there within 2 or 3 minutes of the time you set." That would be marvelous. What else could he do for her? "Does Claire know you're coming?" "No. Would you like her to know? Want me to call her?" "Could you?" "I can try." "Who were the others?" "Gwen and Joan." "Well, I'll try for them. I can't place Gwen." "Thank you very much." "You're quite welcome, Clara. In front of your house at 10:30 tomorrow?" Yeah, he would see her again, and he was useful to her. It was Saturday night. Would grad students be at home, or would they be out on dates? He looked through the church directory, circling Claire's and Joan's names. If Clara wanted them, he might have to call them again. The only Gwen in the directory was a child in a family he knew vaguely. This was not the girl he had seen with Clara, not by more than a decade. Claire was home. She was already planning on church, since this would be coffee hour. She would be glad to sit with Clara. "Does Cassandra want me to take her out to lunch again?" "I don't think so. I'll drive her back after church." And if Clara was willing, he'd buy her lunch, too. He left a message for Joan that Clara would be in church, and to call him back however late. Despite his resolve, he didn't wake up for Joan's call. She left a message on his machine that she would try. He did wake up to his alarm. He usually didn't set it for Sundays. He left the apartment more than 2 hours after he did on weekdays, and usually woke up in plenty of time without an alarm. This, however, was an important day. He couldn't take the risk. In the shower, he found himself thinking of Clara. He thought about her so much that he masturbated. The way his thoughts were going had to be controlled. Women knew when you wanted them sexually. Usually, they took that as a compliment so long as you weren't blatant about it. Clara, however, was understandably nervous about men's desires. He'd taken a back seat to other guys for years because girls thought that he was dull. With Clara, his advantage was that he was safe, which was only another way of saying dull. Still, it was an advantage. He let the mist from the shower dry off the mirror before he shaved carefully. He put on aftershave before eating breakfast and brushed his teeth carefully afterwards. He listened to the radio until 9:30 and then dressed in his best suit. He'd bought a red power tie before discovering that it didn't really make him seem powerful. He wore that. He considered his overcoat, but with his luck somebody at church would ask why he was dressing fancy. He went out to start his car at 9:50. He got to Clara's house in plenty of time. He was a little worried that she would get cold feet, but the third time he circled the block, she was in front. It wasn't quite 10:30 yet. He stopped, and she got in before he could come around to open the door. Well, it was cold out there. Then he was driving her, and they had plenty of time. That was one responsibility fulfilled, but she had asked another of him. Claire said, "Yes," he reported. Joan said maybe. That was the information she wanted. There might be more information she needed. "Look, there is something I should warn you about. After service on third Sundays, the church holds what we call a coffee hour. There is coffee, something to eat." That sounded misleading. Not a meal, maybe donuts, and conversation. You can decide to deal with the coffee hour or not. Probably your friends will introduce you to some others of your age if you do. You can make the decision at the end of service. "Tell me, and I'll deal with it." "I don't know." And how could she know? He'd just sprung it on her. "Well, as I said, you have to decide at the end. You want to go, and we'll go. You're so kind, Mr. Stevens." Not as kind as he'd like to be, and he definitely didn't want to be Mr. Stevens. The twins called him Eric. Why couldn't this beautiful adult? "Well, if you want to return the kindness, call me Eric." "Thanks, Eric." You'll find that Aldersgate doesn't deal much in last names. I'll bet Claire doesn't know mine. He hoped she didn't. He'd had to go through the directory looking for a Claire and a Joan. "I can let you out in front and go park," he said when they got near the church, "or I can park, and we can walk back together." "I'd rather walk with you." And he'd rather walk with her. Even though her preference was probably a reluctance to walk into a building where she might not know anybody in the congregation. Claire was there, as she had said she would be. She sat to Clara's left, and he sat to her right. If Clara sat closer to Claire, he'd had her company to himself in the car. The important things right then were for Clara to regard him as safe and to depend on him. She had Claire's support because of him. When Joan came in, she took Clara's right. Even so, the four of them were together in a row. If Clara got what she wanted in church, then she would call him for a ride to church. Joan and Claire were a lot less permissive about coffee hour than he had been, and Clara agreed to attend. Well, that was all to the good. It would be more connections to Aldersgate, and he was her conduit to Aldersgate. "Look," he told Clara, "this is a time for you to meet your age group. It isn't my age group. Why don't we split up until you're ready to go?" When she had talked as much as she wanted with her table, she came over to his. He'd been conscious of her throughout the time, and he got up before she got there. He said goodbye and walked her to the door. Well, she wasn't among strangers now, and the weather was still nasty. "Why don't you wait here, again?" She was agreeable, and he went and got the car. Again she reached it before he had her door open. "Claire's a nice woman, isn't she?" he asked when they were both inside, and he had the car moving again. "I think she's wonderful." Which, since he was Clara's access to Claire, was very good to hear. "Look, as I said, coffee hour isn't really a meal. Shall we stop on the way for a real Sunday dinner? You have been so kind already." He had enjoyed every minute of it, at least every minute since she'd come out of her door. "Well, I'm a bachelor. I cook some meals, but not Sunday dinner. It isn't as if I had a meal waiting for me at home. If you refuse to eat with me, I'll just visit a restaurant after dropping you off." Solitary eating isn't as dangerous as solitary drinking, but it's rather sad. When I'm eating alone in a restaurant, I always think the other diners are looking over and saying, "Poor man, he doesn't have any friends." Think of it this way. I saved you from a long bus ride, and you'll save me from the pity of waitresses. You're a nice man. I'm sure you have many friends. "A few, but I'd rather be eating with you." Careful. He was beginning to sound like a suitor instead of a nice man. "Thank you, Eric, I'd be happy to eat with you." Perhaps her appetite had been cut back by the coffee hour. She didn't eat much, and she refused dessert. "Look," she said, "I told some people I'd be there next week." Now that was good to hear. "Okay, same time for pickup? Earlier? I really don't think later would leave any time for traffic jams. I should have asked you before committing you." No, she shouldn't. She could commit him to anything. It would have been nice to hear about it earlier, as it would have been nice to have been asked for the ride this Sunday earlier, but only because he could have enjoyed the anticipation. "Well, I can't remember what I said precisely, but my understanding was that I was available any time you wanted to come, and I kept you out of choir." "Yeah, you should have told somebody." He hadn't thought of choir since she had called. You didn't deprive them of much. Aside from a little sexual balance, I contribute very little to the choir. "But don't you enjoy singing?" "Yes, but I enjoy sitting with you much more." And now he was starting to sound like a suitor again. Well, in for a patty, in for a pound. And she had promised some new friends whose phone numbers she probably didn't have, that she would be in church next week. "Look," he finally asked, "what is your easiest day? What day has the least schoolwork? What school night would hamper her studying least if she went on a date?" "Well, I have fewer classes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. But I have physical education Tuesday afternoon. Monday night wouldn't do, anyway, and Friday was probably too late if he was going to give her a ride Sunday." "Okay, in for a patty, in for a pound." Wednesday it was. "So you have the least prep for Thursday." Would you be willing to have me take you out to dinner on Wednesday night? She didn't answer at all. The silence in the car was leaden. Nothing else is contingent on your answer, he finally said. I'll still pick you up on Sunday morning. You want to think about it? Yeah. Now that was a fast answer. Was she afraid to give him a refusal in the car? She should never be afraid of him. But she would be afraid of men for a long while now. Anyway, he'd offered her time to think. He would give her time to think. Well, why don't I call you tomorrow night? Will that be enough time for thinking about it? Really, I don't need the decision before Wednesday, but my mother told me that inviting a girl for a date on one day's notice was bad form. Fine, call me Monday night. After parking, he started around, but she got out of her side before he reached it. She didn't seem nervous, though, when he walked her to the door. Well, he'd blown his chance. He'd moved too fast. Christmas Eve was coming up, and with it the Christmas Eve service. He should have waited a week and invited her to that service. Then he could have suggested taking her out for dinner before. Okay, that was one day's warning, but it was around a church event, and she wanted to participate in church events. Instead, he jumped ahead and scared her off. It turned out, though, that he hadn't scared her off. He called when he said he would. Clara? When he got her. This is Eric Stevens. Yes, Eric, how are you? Well, at least he wasn't Mr. Stevens anymore. I'm fine. Better from your calling me by my first name. And how are you? I'm doing fine. Have you decided about my invitation? What do you have in mind specifically? That she had decided to refuse he could accept. He might cry in secret, but he would understand. That she might accept was his hope. That she'd forgotten? That didn't sound favorable, nor even likely. A meal together, another restaurant, unless you have a particular liking for one of those we've eaten at together. Dinner with you Wednesday night? Why, thank you. I'd be delighted. What time? Okay. First, she had accepted. And, second, she had wanted a specific invitation, probably because she was being overheard. Sorry, I didn't pick up your hint. Would 6:30 at your place be alright? I'm flexible, but if it's too early, I'll have to come straight from work. 6:30 Wednesday. I'll be ready. Thanks again. Well, that thanks was in the wrong direction. And thank you. Goodbye. Now, he had a date to look forwards to. Since he hadn't blown at that time, he also had a careful courtship to plan. He should plan for a year. Clara was currently not too fond of the male sex, afraid of men. Moving too fast would be stupid. If he moved too slowly, however, she would be ready for more than he was providing. Such a girl would have plenty of men willing to provide what she wanted. He thought about getting her a Christmas present, but he thought that might be pushing it too far. On the other hand, she might give him one and embarrass them both. Still, that didn't look likely. He'd leave that until next year. Now that he had started, or, at least, she had accepted that he would start on Wednesday, he had advantages over any likely competition. He couldn't take her to college dances, but he could take her to real restaurants. Not burger joints, but places with tablecloths on the table. What was the protocol with parents these days? He didn't want a secret affair with her. He wanted a courtship. And a courtship meant meeting the parents. And, of course, the parents would say that he was too old. On the other hand, he wasn't a would-be rock star. His salary might be embarrassing among lawyers, but it was better than a college kid had. He decided that he would run his ID through a Xerox machine at work. If they asked who he was, he'd prove that he was who he said he was. If they didn't, and it was quite possible that she would come out without his seeing her parents, the paper would stay in his pocket. Since he'd worn his best suit Sunday, he wore his second best suit to the office Wednesday. He shaved again that night before heading towards her house. The parking was as bad as ever. You should walk up to the door rather than honking from in front. On the other hand, there was the problem of her walking all that distance. Well, let her choose. I'm parked a ways away, he told her when she came to the door. Do you want to wait here while I drive around the block? They say you have to come in and talk with them. Okay, that was one contingency he'd considered. Sure. He met Mr. Wharton. Clara's mother was present, but didn't come forward. This was going to be a cross-examination. Well, he'd been trained for those, and he'd bet Clara's father hadn't. Here, he handed him a Xerox. Always establish that you're forthcoming with all the facts by presenting more of the facts that you want known than the other side asked for. He was a prosecutor, but he knew the tricks defense attorneys used, even for DUIs. What's this? I thought somebody might question my bona fides. That's a Xerox of my driver's license and my ID from the state's attorney's office. I am who I say I am, and you can file that ID away. Why are you interested in Clara? Stupid question. Weren't tons of guys interested in Clara? And it wasn't for her cooking skills. Because, in case you haven't noticed, your daughter is beautiful. I've also seen her interact with the children who are my godson and his brother, Professor Palmer's children. She did quite well with them, and her personality shone through in that interaction. Aren't you awfully old for her? Well, yes, by a decade. On the other hand, she's an adult. I respect your interest in seeing that she's not involved with someone misrepresenting himself. I think that you'll agree that the question of whether I'm too old to date her is one that she's capable of deciding for herself. Well, she's my daughter, and you want to protect her. On the other hand, she's a college student and an adult. She wants to make her own decisions, which any 19-year-old did. Since Clara was listening, that would remind her that dating him was asserting her own judgment. I'm perfectly open to telling you about myself. I've delivered copies of the ID that you're more likely to consider than she is. Go on, ask me what I am, my work. My work is much more impressive than I am. And how did you two meet? Well, had Clara told her parents about the assault? And, even if so, was that something she wanted mentioned? They hadn't talked about it since he delivered his report on the non-prosecution. We were both guests of the Palmers. Cassandra Palmer is Clara's economics professor. Dad, Clara broke in. Eric's the guy I reported the assault to. As you can see, that was a legal matter. While I told her that she would have to tell you sometime, my telling you would have been a breach of confidence. What happened is that she told Professor Palmer. Professor Palmer, while she was born in Arkansas and now lives in Evanston, is enough of a Chicagoan to say, I know a guy. Clara shouldn't have told the guy her professor knows. She should have told the cops. Actually, Clara said, Professor Palmer said that. I didn't want to. So, she told me, and I got her an appointment with the person who was in charge of assault prosecutions. And they didn't believe her. Do you? That was very cruel. Was he being hard on the state's attorney's office, which could spill over onto being hard on him? Was he being hard on his daughter? Well, I believe her. What the person with the responsibility didn't believe was that she could get a conviction. That is a lot different from not believing the witness. She believed her. The cops believed the guy. That wasn't the issue. Besides, nobody on his side believed any accused about anything. The cop, with whom I have never discussed the case, might have believed the guy. Probably not, though. Detectives don't believe much. Again, what he believed was that the suspect couldn't have been proven guilty. In a trial, the jury isn't asked, which one do you believe? They are asked, has this been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt? That is a hard standard to meet. Her dad finally moved off the assault. He didn't have any more questions, but he repeated his previous ones. They didn't like the state. They couldn't prevent it, but they could delay it. That they did. Glad I didn't make reservations, he said as they headed for the car. I'm sorry, she said. She'd started describing the assault by saying that she had been stupid. She shouldn't do that. Well, you didn't do it, he said when they were in the car. You have to learn to stop apologizing for what you didn't do. I make quite enough blunders on my own. I make it a rule that I never apologize for anyone else's actions. Anyway, I understand their concern. Unless she had pulled the Southern Belle trick of eating before she went out to eat, which didn't seem likely, Clara had a small appetite. Maybe she was more nervous than he'd thought. Well, there was one thing here to tempt the weakest appetite. The cinnamon rolls are to die for. It doesn't sound like much of a dessert, but people come here for just those. I couldn't, and I shouldn't. He wouldn't gluttonize in front of her when she wasn't eating. I'll pass them up this time. I think you're good for me. They talked about her school progress while they drove back. This was finals week, which he hadn't known, and she didn't think she had done well. Maybe the nervousness wasn't about him. Thank you for coming with me, he said when he'd found a parking space. She was close enough to home that she shouldn't be afraid of him, but this would be a much more comfortable place for a goodnight kiss than her front porch. Thank you. I really enjoyed myself. I'm not going to grab you, but do you think I might be permitted a kiss? Hell, he'd asked too soon. She was struggling with some issue. I shouldn't even have come on this date with you, she said. Did she have somebody she thought of as her steady? Not, certainly, the assaulter. If she shouldn't be going on dates, why had she gone on dates with that sleaze bag? And, if it wasn't that someone else was entitled to her exclusive interest, it must be that he just didn't pass muster. Was it that bad? Was I that bad of a dinner companion? You've been great. You have. I've been misleading you. Well, she hadn't been misleading him, and now he had made her cry. Now, you can't have misled me. You didn't say anything but that you'd go to dinner with me, and you went to dinner with me. I might have hoped for a kiss afterwards, but I definitely didn't invite you because I thought you would. No, it's worse. I think I'm pregnant. Shit. And he'd been planning a long, slow courtship to get her to the point, in maybe a year, where she might consider a proposal. Well, she didn't need a proposal after a year. She needed a marriage within 9 months. Well, within 9 months, and at least one of those months had passed. You do? Look, I'm sorry. You don't apologize for something you didn't do. Well, he was apologizing for not doing it. Well, that was an apology for something I did, or rather for something I planned. I had this entire, long drawn-out courtship planned. But that's not what you need. If you're going to have a baby, you need a marriage soon, not a year-long courtship. Clara, will you marry me? I can't. Why couldn't she? I'm afraid of kissing you. Marriage means sex, and I don't know that I could go through with it. Well, yes, marriage means sex, but he'd lived nearly 30 years without Clara. He could take his time getting to the point that he could have Claire that way. But she was in tears, and they had more talking to do than this parking space would hold. Finish this talk on Sunday. Well, I shouldn't have turned the motor off. The car's getting cold, and we haven't begun to discuss this. Shall I pick you up for church Sunday? You still will? Yeah, he wanted to. Did she? I still will. Same time. She nodded. We'll talk after. He walked her to her door. She was afraid of kissing him, so he kissed her hand as a compromise. Sunday, he said. Well, that was a real revelation. Poor Clara. The scumsucker had not only assaulted her, he had knocked her up. He spent the drive home feeling sorry for her. When he got back to the apartment and was lying in his bed, however, he saw that his own chances were suddenly better. His instincts had been correct. She didn't need a long courtship. She needed a fast marriage. Nothing that she had said suggested that there was another possibility on her horizon. The shithead wasn't much of a possibility. He'd assaulted her in the first place. He'd called her a liar in the second place. He was a college student. Even a basketball star didn't have all that great a financial promise unless he was pro-material, and the guys on the TV leading the draft picks didn't come from the Flames. She could, of course, raise a kid by herself. Plenty of women did, but it wasn't a great experience. She could probably get support from the perp. He'd admitted intercourse. But his financial prospects weren't any brighter for paying support than for supporting a wife while he was still in college. She should become Mrs. Eric Stevens. Marriage to him was in her best interests. Persuading her to marry him wouldn't be conning her or defrauding her. He might be a junior member of the lowest priority team in the state's attorney's office, but he was, nevertheless, a litigator. Let's see how he could persuade her. She had 3 choices, really. Well, 4, but she didn't need a husband to get an abortion. She could swear off men forever. That might sound tempting right now, but it meant a fairly lonely life. After all, the supporting feminists were ones Cassandra had found for her. She didn't have contact with the group herself. Then, too, a single mother had more problems. And a single mother trying to get through college had even more. She could reconnect to males slowly and gradually, crossing one line after she felt comfortable about having crossed the last. That had been his program for her before she dropped her bombshell. Presumably, that could lead all the way to marriage. If she chose that course, he'd be around hoping that the male she was reconnecting to would be himself. She could get married first, married to a man who would accept that the reconnection would proceed slowly. That, of course, would limit her choices of men. Most wouldn't accept a marriage on the promise of intimacy in the distant future. If he didn't see any likely competitors for her favor, he didn't see any competitors with that amount of patience. Well, he was probably her only candidate. She'd said that she wouldn't do the third. That, however, was something like, I couldn't do that to you. If he was willing, then she wouldn't be yielding if she changed her mind. And it would be better for a baby to be born with a father to care for him. Sometime, she would start thinking in terms of what was best for the baby. If she opted for the first, he was shit out of luck. But she hadn't opted for the first to the extent of refusing to go on a date with him. If she opted for a mild form of the first, he would continue to drive her back and forth to church. He would continue to take her to occasional dinners. He didn't think she could go off men forever, and, when she redecided, there would be one man as far in her life as she would allow. And, if she opted for the second, he would suggest that she try things out with him. She knew the social rules. A girl could go forward with a guy, but she couldn't go back. Well, he would promise her that he would let her go back if she crossed a line with him and found that this made her too uncomfortable. He'd kiss her, and if that was too much, he'd stop kissing her until she thought it was worth trying again. And, sometime, she'd find the nerve to accept him all the way. On the way home from the office Thursday, he stopped at a narcotics store and bought a package of condoms. That night, he called Dennis, the choir director, to tell him that he wouldn't be singing for a while. He called before dinner because choir rehearsal was later that night. Christmas Eve? Dennis asked. Have I been to enough rehearsals? Well, I don't know. Expect me if you see me, and only if you see me in the choir room. I may just be in the congregation. Dennis might not be happy, but he was pleasant. They both knew that Eric was no great musical performer. You're looking well, Eric said when he picked Clara up Sunday. It was an opinion honestly felt. She had always been beautiful, but she had also been hangdog. She didn't actually look chipper, but she did look calmer. Thanks. You always look nice. I feel like I'm underdressed when I'm with you. Do you own anything but suits? Yeah, I even own a couple of pairs of jeans, which isn't to say that I could fit in them. But think for a minute. What do you wear to school? Jeans. Yeah, but I don't think I've ever seen you when you weren't in a skirt. So you dress up for Sundays. I, on the other hand, wear a suit every day to the office. So I don't dress up at all for Sundays. That's a weird way to look at it. Not everybody at your church wears suits. Not everybody. Not half as a matter of fact. But there are men who don't wear ties. We're mostly a live and let live bunch. On the other hand, lawyers, businessmen, guys who wear ties every day wear them to church, too. Some of the Northwestern folk wore sports coats. Dan Hagopian told me once that a professor could teach his class in his shirt sleeves so long as he had a sports coat hanging in his office. Sounds silly. She actually smiled. Oh, it is silly. But every profession has its silliness. They were companionably silent until he crossed Howard. He wasn't near the church yet, but she seemed to feel that leaving the city called for her to make the declaration. Look, she said, I'm awfully grateful for your offer. But this is my problem, and I've got to deal with it. Well, I was planning to wait until after service. We have a lot of talking to do, but I disagree almost totally. I didn't make an offer. I made a request. I made it earlier than I had planned to because I thought that waiting was a bad idea. Even so, it was a request that I had planned to make at a later date. You think your kid is your problem, and so he is, but a kid isn't solely your problem. Do you think that Cassandra, Professor Palmer, goes off in a corner with her kids and deals with them without help? Now the first help she has is the father of the kids, and I can see why you don't want him involved. But other people help, too. Some of them are paid. Some of them, like me, are friends. Some of them, like the Sunday school teachers, are part of the church. Some of them are part of the community. Parents depend on the community, he continued. So do people with other sorts of problems. The first thing that Professor Palmer thought of for you. Well, the second thing after you'd reported to the official authorities was a support network. Well, the official government let you down. The support network seems to have worked better. But there are all sorts of support networks, and you shouldn't think you have to go on your own because the most regular network has failed you. And I don't mean the state's attorney's office, although we did fail you. The father of your child failed you one hell of a lot worse. You can force him to pay some support, but you can't get blood out of a turnip. But you're not going it alone. Nobody else does. Look, we'll talk later. Clara, who had sat in a back corner the previous week, joined Claire, Joan, and Kurt in a pew nearly halfway down, with him trailing after her. Kurt was so obviously interested in Joan that Eric wasn't bothered by him. The three women sat together, and he sat beside Kurt. After church they all urged Clara to come to Christmas Eve program the next night. She looked at him. Sure, if you want. I know the time. Let's start at the end and work backward, he said in the car. The Christmas Eve program is late, but not all that late. It starts at 8 p.m. and isn't in the sanctuary. What I thought of, despite the rule against inviting a girl at the last minute, is my picking you up at 6:30 again. We could eat and leave the program. Does that suit? Sure. Okay, let's deal with the more important issue. Do you see yourself as avoiding men for the rest of your life? She said no. I'm sure I can shake this. It's just right now, it's too much. Okay, I understand why it's too much. I said, way back, that I wouldn't take it personally if you wanted to ride in the back seat. Well, if you're off men, and as far as you're off men, I won't take it personally. You're a sweet guy, Eric, she said. He was really a selfish guy. He wanted her, and he was willing to pay what that cost. Then, too, if you're going to get over it, you'll do that in stages. I won't force any stage beyond the ones I've forced already. If you feel ready for some stage, and try it, and, after trying it, you feel that you really weren't ready for it, I won't take that personally, either. You mean sex? That is really one of the stages, but not the one I meant. I was thinking of kisses. If you think you could risk a kiss with me, and then figure that was a mistake, I'm not going to insist on another one. I think I'm at that level now, she said. Good, because I've been wanting a kiss from you for a long time. But let's put that off for another minute, and let me finish my thought. You're right. Sex is the last stage. I've only had it once, and that was... Now, that was interesting. She'd been a virgin before she had been assaulted. That meant something, but he couldn't see it right now. What you had, Clara, was assault. That isn't sex. Maybe he had sex, you didn't. I'm not the world's greatest expert, but there is a difference. Anyway, it is one stage, and, while I've said that you'll choose the stages and I won't, I'll say that you're not ready for that stage yet. And, I'll bet, you've done some of the stuff in between. Some of that, you're not ready for yet. Anyway, it was time for him to articulate the choices he saw for her. If you're right that you'll overcome this, and I'm right that you'll do it in stages, then I see you as having two choices. One, you go through the stages, and, when you're at the stage where marriage is appropriate, and you have someone with whom you want to have a marriage, you get married and go on to the next stage. Two, you get married. Married to a guy who will bear with you while you go through the stages. Then you go through the stages with him. Admittedly, the marriage will require a certain degree of intimacy, which you're not quite ready for, yet. But I can wait for most intimacy until you feel comfortable with it. I don't. She didn't finish the thought. It would take a while to get a 2-bedroom apartment, but I could do that. I wouldn't feel honest doing that. Well, it might be better for the baby, he said, but it's your decision. And, of course, that's what I see as your possibilities. You're in a car with this being thrown at you. Although some of it is merely saying your situation out loud. It's your decision, and it will continue to be your decision. But, getting back to what you said earlier, do you think you're ready to be kissed without freaking? Really, yes. Well, you're not ready to be kissed by the driver of a moving car. Let me get this over. A little later, he found a legal parking space. Okay, why don't you give me your hands? He loosened his seat belt before taking each of her hands in one of his. He leaned over and kissed her with closed lips. He let her hands go and went back to his seat. Was that okay? She nodded. He leaned over to kiss her again. This was longer, but still closed mouth. Look, I'm not grabbing you. He reached his right hand up to cup her head. Then, slowly, he returned to kiss her. He used his hand to pull her into the kiss. He was really enjoying this when she pushed him away. Immediately, he relaxed his grip on her head and pulled back. Was that too much? He asked. Not really. I pushed to see what would happen. I let go. I'll always let go. Well, this was fun, but I was going to feed you when this started. He started the car and drove to the restaurant he'd intended. It was a Vietnamese restaurant in Uptown, chosen mostly to give them enough time on the drive to have their talk. They both had bowls of soup. It was the first meal he'd seen her finish. They talked of inconsequentials, but he'd been thinking. Kissing her in the car had been marvelous, but the car wasn't the place for kisses. The steering wheel cramped him. Maybe she was ready to come to his apartment. Not now, but tomorrow. You know, what about my picking you up earlier tomorrow? Maybe 6 o'clock? She looked at him steadily, probably reading his mind. Sure, she finally said. They say that the dress is casual for the program. Yeah, it's not a worship service. It's mostly about kids. Will I see you in jeans? He said. As I said, I'm not sure that they'll fit. You won't see me in a suit, that's for sure. I don't work Christmas Eve, but I can wear jeans. Sure, and she might wear tight jeans which would reveal her shape. I'd love that. And they won't embarrass you in the restaurant. Nonsense. He wished more people who knew him could see him with her. That would improve his reputation whatever she was wearing. And he certainly wouldn't take her any place where her clothes would embarrass her. As I said, I admit that I'm a lawyer. Nothing embarrasses me. I wouldn't take you somewhere where you would be embarrassed. He planned the restaurants ahead of time, of course, but he could change his choice if it looked like the wrong choice. After he drove her home, he said, unbuckle your seatbelt, but don't get out. She followed directions. Now, do you think you could kiss me? He turned towards her, and she met him. He let her have control, but he held her face in both hands very gently. She kissed his lips, kissed over his cheek. She pushed his hands down, and he let her. She returned to his lips and licked them. When he opened his mouth, her tongue met his. It was the most exciting kiss he'd ever had. Then she pulled back. You are wonderful, he said. They got out of the car, and he walked her to the door. Clara? He said. She looked at him. He bent down and kissed her, his tongue entering her mouth for the first time. After a moment, he drew away. Thank you for a wonderful time. He spent much of Monday cleaning up his apartment, including the bedroom that he was certain she wouldn't see. While he worked, he thought about her statement that she hadn't had sex before the assault. He had been right. If she hadn't had any other sex, she hadn't had any sex. She was still a virgin. If she no longer had her hymen, she had never said yes to sex. In some abstract sense, that made her more desirable yet. He didn't desire her more than he had. It was impossible to desire her more than he had. But it meant that the act would be all the more frightening for her. She had only one memory, and that was of violence. He picked Clara up at 6 o'clock and returned to the Chinese restaurant where he had first taken her. He'd noticed before that they had fairly fast service, and he thought they wouldn't have much business on Christmas Eve. He was right on both counts. They got their fortune cookies a few minutes after 7 o'clock. He gently placed his hand on hers before she opened the cookie. Look, when we're done here, I'd like to take you back to my apartment. You want to show me your etchings? She asked, surprising him with her knowledge. Only the ones you want to see. He removed his hand, and they both opened their fortunes. You will meet a beautiful blonde, he read aloud. Don't believe anything a lawyer tells you. She smiled. They exchanged a warm, knowing look. They weren't just friends anymore. They shared something deeper, a quiet understanding and connection. At the apartment, he took her coat and hung it alongside his in the closet. She was wearing jeans and a blouse. They stood close, sharing a gentle kiss, savoring the moment without rushing. He reached for her hand and held it gently. Let's keep things simple tonight, he said softly. If you ever feel uncomfortable, just tell me. I will, she replied, feeling safe and respected. They stayed close, talking quietly, sharing warmth and trust. After a while, he glanced at his watch. It's time. If we want to see the pageant, we should get ready. She nodded and smiled, appreciating the gentle care between them. They dressed, shared a few more words, and headed out together. The program had several parts. The pageant was just like last year, except this time baby Jesus was played by little Tracy White, with her mom Janice close by throughout. Paul, threatened with a trip home before Santa arrived, didn't do his sheep imitation during the show. Clara congratulated the boys afterward, and Paul gave his imitation then. Bill seemed to think it was only a minor breach, and both boys got to sit on Santa's knee. Bill and Cassandra took the boys home, but Clara and he stayed for the singing. "I'm glad you came," Joan told Clara. "So am I," Clara said. That was quite nice to hear. He had no illusions. She saw him in two contexts, Aldersgate and the office. The office had failed her. As long as Aldersgate satisfied her needs, the guy who drove her there satisfied some needs. Then, too, in her old neighborhood, she had some circle of friends. At Circle, she had some circle of friends. Probably both circles included boys or men. At Aldersgate, she was with Eric. Everyone but Cassandra and Bill saw it that way, and Cassandra didn't seem anxious to claim Clara. She waited while he got the car. He got them going towards her house. She seemed bemused. Was she thinking about the program? He hoped she was also thinking about the time with him, because whatever she was thinking about, she was pleased with it. Well, if she wasn't thinking about their makeout session, she wasn't, at least, worrying that they'd gone too far or having flashbacks because of it. If she weren't pregnant, he would have been very happy about the progress that they had made. And the pregnancy should be pressing her rather than him. He'd marry her in the delivery room if that was what she wanted. "Enjoy yourself?" he asked. "Yeah, both parts." That was wonderful to hear. "You're not only a nice guy, you're part of a nice group, too. I felt at home there. Going back Sunday." Of course, she didn't know what a change that marked in her. The Sunday after Christmas, attendance would be very light, and it wasn't only that many students had gone home. She had become a regular. "Am I going to see you before then?" He wanted to, but he didn't want to push. Besides, this had been so pleasant that he didn't have anything to offer that was as good. They could go to his apartment to make out, and she had said that she enjoyed it, but he knew that he had to offer something public for a date. She took a long time before answering. "I don't think so. This has been great, but we've been moving too fast." Well, if they were going to get married before she began to show, they had been going none too fast. But the reluctance which slowed them down was hers. The decision had to be hers. "Well, you set the limits. I've been moving too fast. I'm not accusing you of anything." That was good to hear. She needed to feel in control as well as being in control. If she felt in control with him, then that was an advantage he had over any possible rival. 10:30 Sunday morning, he said. That was another advantage. She would be with him after and before and during church. He would have a great deal more of her time than any new rival. 10:30 Sunday morning, she echoed. Then, after he had parked, walked me to the door, which he would have done anyway. But it was both a prohibition and a permission. They weren't going to have any goodnight kisses in the car, but they were going to have one on her doorstep unless he misread her completely. Of course. And he hadn't misread her. He gave her a lover's parting kiss at her door, clasping her in his arms when he did. She didn't object to the clasp. "Love you," he said, but she went in without answering. Even so, it had been a great time. Clara had started her recovery from the fright the assault had given her, and she had started with him. He thought again about her virginity. She had rejected his offer of marriage before they had gone through the stages. If they got to the point of actual sex, and she chickened out from that, he would make a similar offer again. He would explain to her that she had not said yes to any man, and that that first yes was traditionally, if that tradition was seldom honored by their contemporaries, said after the service. The program, too, had been a great time. She was becoming part of the community, and they were a couple in that community. He wanted them to be Clara and Eric Stevens, and being Clara and Eric was a good start. It was, in itself, quite pleasant. He would, of course, like to have more time with her this coming week. If she didn't want to go further, then they could make that the rule. If she thought that they had gone too far, then they could confine themselves to kissing. Kissing Clara was a quite pleasant experience. Still, her statement that they should wait a week because they were moving forwards too rapidly suggested that she expected to move forwards on the next date. He had a few presents from family and friends that he opened on Christmas Day. He got lanyards from Paul and Johnny, and a picture of them from Cassandra and Bill. Even so, the gift he would treasure from this Christmas was the one he had opened the night before. Service businesses reopened the next day, and his office didn't. He got all his suits, but one to the cleaners, did his laundry, restocked his shelves. The next 2 days, he went into the office and caught up on all his paperwork. Traffic court was closed for the year. While he had a woman who came in Friday mornings while he was gone to do his serious cleaning, she was off between Christmas and New Year's. He expected Clara to come back to his apartment on Sunday, and he spent much of Saturday cleaning and straightening. Sunday morning, he made his bed with fresh sheets. He knew she wouldn't actually see the bedroom that day, but she was setting the pace, and he would have it ready whenever she thought her pace called for that stage. With the same thought, he opened the box of condoms and tore one off the strip. He put it in the drawer loose. After all, while he wouldn't press her, her pregnancy would. He would always be prepared, though the provision of a condom was a little contradiction to her pregnancy pressing her. She thought she was pregnant, but he hadn't heard that she had checked on it. If she was mistaken and he did get her pregnant, he would go from being her comforter to being her tormentor damned quickly. And, of course, there was always the danger that she had decided that she had gone too far too soon, that she wasn't going to return to his apartment. He prayed that she wouldn't decide that, but he had to be prepared to take such a decision with good grace. He was circling the block for the second time when Clara came out of her house. Another car was coming, and he didn't get out to let her in. He started up as soon as she was buckled in, and soon they were headed east on Belmont. "Did you have a nice Christmas?" he asked her. "Fairly nice, surprisingly enough." "And you?" "Really, the pageant was the acme of my Christmas celebration. I gave and got a couple of presents, but the celebration is really about kids. I did get handmade gifts from each of the twins." Now, he was talking about Christmas presents. Should he have bought her one? Should I have got you a present? I'm glad you didn't. I didn't get you one. Which was about what he had concluded. Yeah, what are we? They weren't yet lovers. He was her suitor, but she seemed to still be rejecting that. He was the old guy who gave her rides to church, but he wanted to go beyond that. And, really, they had gone beyond that on Christmas Eve. "Friends," she said. "I'll go with that." He wanted to be her friend. He wanted to be more, but his only chance of being more was working up from being a friend. Joan and Kurt were at the service. They sat together, with Joan and Clara side by side. He felt a little jealous of Kurt, who was sitting close enough to Joan to touch her, but Clara wasn't ready for that yet. Since he'd been to a few Oriental restaurants lately, he took her to a nice, casual American place. "Would you like to see my etchings again?" he asked in the car. "I'd like that," she said softly. She was happy with what they'd shared so far, but he wondered if she was ready for the next step. At the restaurant, they quickly settled in and relaxed. Kissing in coats didn't work, so they removed their outer layers. Their kisses deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. She showed no hesitation when he gently helped her relax, and he admired her quiet confidence. They moved to the sofa for more conversation and gentle closeness. He cherished the tender moments they shared, soft touches, quiet smiles, and lingering kisses. He was careful to respect her boundaries, sensing her trust in him. "Remember when I scared you before?" he asked gently. "Yes," she nodded. "Well, maybe this time, you can take the lead." She considered it silently, then slowly, with quiet resolve, she began to take that step herself. He held her hand and smiled, grateful for her trust. They shared more quiet moments, with soft touches and whispered words. When she felt ready, she adjusted her position to be closer to him. He responded with tenderness, careful and patient. Their connection grew stronger, filled with warmth and care. She was discovering her own pace, and he was there to support her every step of the way. When she leaned into him, he held her gently, and they shared a quiet, sweet moment together. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "That was wonderful," she replied with a smile. "Should we stay here a little longer, or head somewhere more private?" he asked gently. She had taken several steps. She had several more to take, but they all really should be in bed. The last one she had taken really should have been, as his legs, nearly going to sleep from her weight, told him. In bed, they could kiss. He could caress her whole body. He could even kiss much of it. They could both be comfortable. They would go further another day, but they would go further while lying down. She was thinking again, not rejecting what he'd said, but not accepting it, either. Well, it was her decision. He kissed her shoulder, where the kiss wouldn't distract her from her thoughts, and went back to watching her thoughts reflected on her face. As the calculation went on, a thought occurred to him. What he had proposed didn't really deserve this much consideration. Had she misunderstood him? Did she think he had proposed sex? That was more than one stage beyond where they had gone, and he thought that one stage at a time was best for her, least likely to panic her. He kissed her shoulder again, trying for reassuring but conscious that she was unlikely to be reassured. On the other hand, if she were taking this much time to consider it, that would mean that she thought sex with him was a possibility. Sex with him this afternoon was a possibility. And her reason for refusing marriage was that she would never be able to have sex. If she was considering sex, even if she turned it down for this afternoon, then that reason no longer applied. He went back to kissing her shoulder. His legs were getting a little tired, but let her think as long as she wanted. When she decided, she got up from his lap. Seeing her intention, he quickly moved his arms to give her space. She didn't return to her clothes immediately, but headed toward the bedroom. He watched her for a moment, then followed her. She lay down on the bed. "Clara, darling." He wasn't sure what she had decided, but he promised she could change her mind any time. He knelt beside her and kissed her gently, showing care and tenderness. They shared a quiet, intimate moment filled with affection. Later, as they talked, he gently asked about her worries. "Look, can we talk?" You said you think you might be pregnant. Have you seen a doctor? I'm pretty sure. You don't look pregnant. Well, even if you were certain, you should go to a doctor. I don't know all that much about pregnancy, but I've been in the choir when pregnant women have talked. They all visit the doctor. Even if she were, and she probably was, their plans would be much better grounded when they knew. I've told Mom. Maybe I'll ask her about doctors. I don't like talking to her about it, though. She doesn't believe I was assaulted. She thinks I wanted to have sex with him. Well, when we're married, I'll be paying your doctor bills, or, at least, my insurance will. I don't see anything wrong with starting early. Really, it's just an investment in having a safe pregnancy, and most of the pregnancy will be during the marriage. She didn't say anything to that. She was thinking again, but what was there about his statement to think about? She was a middle-class woman in Evanston, not a hillbilly. Middle-class urban women went to doctors when they were pregnant. You have to talk to somebody. It seems he'd been telling her that all the time. Do you need a gynecologist? Doctors have ethical rules, just like lawyers do, which didn't seem so convincing now he'd said it. Not a great recommendation, I know, but we mostly obey legal ethics. Honestly, we do. Anyway, go to your doctor. I'll pay, and he'll keep silent. He was going to be her husband, and the sooner they were certain, the sooner he'd be her husband. If she didn't want to talk to her mother, then he could start paying the bills a little early. I don't know. That didn't seem encouraging. When they were married, she'd follow Cassandra's advice or some more recent mother. All the women in church did. On the other hand, this was a catch-22. She needed the certainty of the pregnancy to get her to decide for the wedding. And, here, he wasn't simply being selfish. The sooner the wedding, the less the gossip. If you don't want to ask your mother for a name, do you want to ask Professor Palmer? Huh. As I said, the women in the choir gossip with each other. They don't talk to me about such things, but I hear. I've heard her say nice things about her gynecologist. Damn it. He'd heard them say nice things about Priscilla's circle, too. Clara was probably eligible. He never heard of UNW being stuffy about church membership, and the new circles were notoriously independent of the. She, however, wouldn't want to mention the pregnancy before the marriage, and a pregnancy, or a young kid, was one of the unofficial requirements for Priscilla's circle. I won't talk to Professor Palmer until school starts again. Was that won't as a refusal or won't as a prediction? Well, although she had been in her house once, she probably expected to deal with Cassandra at school. He could try. You could call her on the phone. I have her number. She is almost certainly at home now. They, after all, had gone out to eat after church, and they had got home long ago. If the Palmer family had gone out to eat after church, despite any delays caused by the boys, they would be home by now. Clara got up and started to pull on her panties. She hadn't said that she would call, or that she wouldn't. Well, back then, she hadn't said that she would go into the bedroom, either. He got the church directory for her. When she was fully dressed, including pantyhose and shoes, she went to the phone. He went into the bedroom to get dressed himself. He could hear her side of the conversation. May I talk to Professor Palmer, please? A long silence. Professor Palmer, this is Clara, Clara Wharton. I hate to bother you again. Eric gave it to me. I hate to bother you at home, but I have a question and you've helped me before. That's right. He could call Cassandra when he wanted to, and she could tell him the time was inconvenient when it was, but Clara was a student. On the other hand, Clara could ask this question, and he could not. Damn, I want to talk to a gynecologist. I need to talk to one, and I don't want to ask my mom. Do you have the name of one? I can get there. Another long pause. Thank you very much. Goodbye. He went out in his stockings. I'll call him one day, she said when she saw him. Good. What's his name? Gable. That could have several spellings, though fewer than Hawthorne's 7. This one, he found in the book, was spelled Gable. He made out a blank check to that name and gave it to Clara. Another worry had occurred to him, though. Look, he told her, maybe you should be checked for venereal diseases as well as pregnancy. She looked aghast. I trust you, but I don't trust the MF. Miss Murphy thought he might make a habit of something like what he did to you. Don't, for God's sake, have nightmares about that. Just check it out. For that matter, they would have to be checked for syphilis, at least, before they got married. Okay, I will. Great. One problem settled. Now, however, they were both dressed. The afternoon had ended, but he didn't want it to end. Well, the choice was hers. The choice was always hers. I don't know what to do next, he told her. We could stay here. I have eggs and I could fix you an omelet for dinner. We could go to a movie and eat out. We could even go to a movie and come back here, for that matter, but I wouldn't take you to a place where the food is cooked as badly as I cook. Why don't you take me home? Well, the choice was always hers, and that choice was always the girl's. Trying to lock her in was false arrest, if not kidnapping. Well, there are a lot of reasons against it, but come here. She did, and she cooperated with the kiss. Then he got his shoes and their outerwear. He took her home. Well, what was the next stage? Not the next stage of her sex life, since they'd reached the last stage, and she hadn't been frightened. What was the next stage of their relationship? When, to be very short-sighted, was their next date? Tomorrow was New Year's Eve. They had enjoyed a wonderful Christmas Eve, but he didn't think he could provide anything like it for New Year's Eve. He really wanted to stay inside and avoid the drunk drivers. He wanted to be their prosecutor, not their victim. When can we get together again? Tomorrow is New Year's Eve, but it doesn't have to be tomorrow. Truth to tell, what I like about being with you is you. I'm not all that enthused about taking you out drinking somewhere. Well, I know I said that I would think things out last week, but I didn't think things out enough. I really didn't expect that. Well, neither of them had expected to go that far. He hadn't intended to push. Had she felt pushed? Darling, did I push you too far? You didn't push. The situation did. That was good to hear. Right at the end, he had been pushing, or, at least, begging. I was going to go along with you until the fright got too bad. The fright was going to get too bad long before we got to actual sex. I trusted you to stop when I said no. Hell, you even asked me to say yes, which was a much more favorable way of putting it than begging was. Well, yes, I said I'd go forward until you stopped me, but right then I thought that you should have more opportunity to stop. And, which he didn't want to say, asking for a yes was the opposite of assault. He wanted that contrast. Eric, you're a wonderful guy, which was also great to hear. She wasn't expressing love, but she was expressing that he was near the top of her preference list. I love you. He did, more than before, and he hadn't thought that possible. She didn't love him, and she didn't say she did. So, I really think we should wait till next Sunday. Your choice. And, of course, that didn't mean that they would meet Sunday. It definitely didn't sound like she was going out with another man. And, of course, the campus where she could meet other men was shut down. He kissed her again at her doorway before heading back to his car. During the drive home and later that evening, he kept replaying the moments they had shared. She was amazing. Then he went to a local burger place for dinner. A spot he'd never take Clara, but it was cheap. He found himself reflecting on their time together. He realized he'd been foolish to take her for granted. She had said yes to him, the first time she ever had. They had shared a deep connection, stronger than anything he'd known before. Yet, when he last asked her to commit, she had declined. She had since softened, but instead of showing appreciation, he had assumed all was settled. Anyone with common sense would let her come to her own decision, and taking her for granted was a bad sign for their future. Then, too, marriages meant weddings, and weddings meant engagements. Women cared about weddings and engagement rings. They cared about proposals, too. He had denied her the one and had silenced her about the other two. Well, they would eat after church. If she gave him time, and she was always so understanding, he would take the time to make it up to her. Probably, they should talk in his apartment. There might well be details she might not want to discuss in public. Besides which, the apartment would be their first home. If it was the scene of his blundering, it should be the scene of his making up for it. The next day, which was New Year's Eve, and, thus, not a work day, he spent planning out what he would do and the decisions that they would make. He usually ate only breakfasts and weekend lunches at home, but he ate in another diner that noon and cooked himself an omelet for dinner that night. He really disliked traffic on New Year's Eve. He realized on the first that he had planned too much. Clara was not only a person who could have a voice in the decisions, she was a person who was entitled to a say in what decisions they made. He thought, for the first time, of her child not only as a problem in her life, but as a person in their future. Well, people didn't have to know everything. The boy should be his son as far as anyone outside the family knew. Cassandra and Bill would know better, but Cassandra's knowledge had come when Clara was her client. Well, student. He didn't think that gossip fit in with what professors saw as professional ethics. Bill was easy. Holding his mouth would be the price of holding the baby. It might be harder inside the family, but Clara would need his help in childcare. She would accept his voice as equal to hers in the decisions over childcare. And, actually, he would be willing to give her a little precedence in childcare decisions. Like housework, that was traditionally the wife's prerogative. Traffic court reopened on the 3rd, and he went back to work. These ideas kept circling in his head at night, though. On Friday, his house was cleaned, and on Saturday he neatened everything except his bedroom. He neatened the bedroom Sunday morning before leaving to pick her up. She came out the 3rd time he circled the block. They spoke of inconsequentials on the way there. The day was cold but dry, and the wind was low. He didn't ask her whether she wanted to be let off at church before he parked the car. They were a little early and sat about where they had sat before. When Claire came in, she joined them. "Look, we have to talk," he said when they were in the car after service. "Why don't we get takeout and eat in my apartment?" "Sure. I was thinking Thai. Would you rather have pizza? Something else?" Thai would be fine. She was always so agreeable to his suggestions. Well, sometimes she had thought long and hard about them, but those were serious decisions she had to make. They got 3 boxes of Thai food and headed back to his place. He got got everything out and seated her. Now was the time. Look, I took you for granted last week. I'm sorry. I never want to take you for granted again. You never said you would marry me. He knelt down to say, Clara, darling Candace, will you marry me? Get up and go sit down. This will be a long conversation. That didn't sound good. On the other hand, she could say no as fast as yes. I'm carrying a child, she continued. How do you plan to treat that child? That sounded almost as if she was taking a marriage as a given. Still, it was a question, and it deserved an answer. Well, I have thought about that. In the first place, it's rather nasty to punish a kid for what his father has done. That becomes ridiculous when it is for what his father has done to his mother. This will be your baby, and you'll love it. Well, I love you, and I will love him too. That was really the bottom line. He would love anything that was associated with her. You keep saying him. I sometimes say her. That wasn't a serious matter. One of them would be wrong and change their expression. Saying it sounded unloving. Well, I will love him or love her. Have you been to the doctor then? Are you sure? I've been to the doctor, but I only saw him on Friday. Doctors take New Year's Day off. I don't have the results yet. He's not sure. I fairly well am. Well, she might think she was sure, but she didn't seem to be making decisions the way she would be when she was. Well, then the rest of what we say isn't. Clara's pregnant. This is what we will do. This is what we will do if Clara is pregnant. That doesn't apply to the proposal, although it may well apply to your answer, and it's almost certain to apply to our timeline. It really applied to her answer. It even applied to his proposal, in some way. He wanted to marry her if she were pregnant, and he wanted to marry her if she were not. The marriages, though, would be different. Then, Eric, in answer to your question, and if I am pregnant, then I will marry you. Darling. He needed to kiss and hug her. Finish your dinner. Her tone was forceful. The words were a little ironic coming from her. She so seldom finished hers. Even so, he went back to his pad thai. Well in line with the discussion of how we would raise the child, I proposed that, in all but the biological sense, it will be my child. There are a few people who will know different, but really very few, and those are your friends. Claire and them are your support group. They aren't going to gossip about you. That was really what he'd thought about. He'd thought through this much more than mistreating her child. Well, when the baby is born, they'll all know. They won't know much. Only a few would know much. Except that, if she demanded child support from the douchebag, he could claim some time with the kid, and that would have legal complications for what they needed to tell the school district. For that matter, what were the obligations on birth certificates? That, however, was a bunch of bridges to cross when they came to them. They'll all know that it was conceived before the marriage. A few old hens will cackle about that. Aside from the 3 girls, who will be getting their degrees and scattering to the 4 winds in a few years, only Cassandra and Bill will know it was conceived before we met. And people they tell. Well, yes. Didn't you tell Cassandra as a confidence to your teacher? I don't think she'll be tempted to gossip. And Bill is easy. We're talking about a baby, at least in the first instance. If I say he can hold my baby, he damn well isn't going to say it isn't mine. For that matter, as little honor is given to a boy by saying he's my son, it's more honor than saying that he's the son of a assaulter. Bill isn't going to tell you anything detrimental about a baby he's held. Well, if I'm asking you to treat her, or him, like your own child, I can hardly object to calling it your child. And that was her position. Well, they might have disagreements as time went on, but other couples did, too. They were totally unlikely to disagree as much about child raising as Cassandra and Bill did, and the twins were Bill's sons. Some people in the choir and their families have heard me call you Miss Wharton. If they remember when, and few of them will, they'll only think that I was pretending a distance from you for some reason. After all, I asked you for a conversation then. They didn't know the subject. For all they know, I was trying to patch a lover's quarrel. And of course, me and Dad know. And they have the least reason to gossip of anybody. People around Miss Murphy know. That's a legal confidence. But the office often treats information coming in as only confidential in terms of not going out. I'll speak to Miss Murphy, though, and ask her to keep it from going further. She doesn't owe me any favors, but you're a victim. She'll do practically anything for a victim who'll come forward. Claire told me that Professor Palmer made me out to be some kind of hero. For the now crowd? You probably are. For Murphy, if you're not a heroine, you waited too long for that. You are. How to express a cooperating witness to a lay person. What she needs to operate. Clara thought of herself as damaged goods, which was all very well if it led her to accept his proposal. It was unrealistic, though, and might interfere with her later life. Which reminds me, you go to worship in Aldersgate. You don't take communion. Are you Catholic? I'm hardly anything. Lapsed Lutheran if there is such a thing. I just feel so dirty. Well, don't. That was a stupid thing for me to say, he continued. You can't help how you feel. But communion isn't for the extra pure, and anyway, What the scumsucker did to you doesn't have anything to do with how pure you are. Anyway, he was talking too much, but he'd thought of these things. To change the topic, do you know when the doctor will call you? He won't. I'll call him Tuesday. Okay, Tuesday night. Do you want to go shopping with me for an engagement ring? Was he supposed to select it himself and bring it with him for the proposal? Well, it was a little late for that. And, besides, he didn't know anything about a ring. You want that? Well, we're planning on the basis of assuming that you're pregnant. If you are, you said that you will marry me. If that's the case, then we're engaged. That calls for a ring. We really owe it to your parents to tell them first. You don't want to go home and wave a ring in their face the way you do with your friends. Since men don't get rings, I'll tell some of my friends at work. I'll leave it to you to wear the ring in church. I'll just stand close and look proud. And hold my hand. Now, that he would always be willing to do. Definitely. Whenever you let me. Only your right hand, though, until the news gets out. Really, though, when do we tell your parents? And how? And who? I mean, do you tell them? Or do we tell them? I could take the three of you out to dinner. Well, let's do it a little different. So she wasn't always going to follow his lead blindly. You keep paying for my dinners. This is only the beginning. I plan to pay for your dinners for decades to come. Until death us do part, with a few exceptions for potlucks and office dinners. Yeah, but then I'll be cooking them. And that was good to hear, too. Anyway, why don't I get Mom to invite you for dinner one night? We can tell them then. Okay, you still have my card? She did. You can call at the office or leave a message here. Probably, both would be better. I've missed messages at the office. Okay, and where are we going to meet Tuesday? You want me to pick you up at your place? That would be nice. I'll find a jewelry store in Evanston. Or do you want to shop on State Street? Evanston is fine. We'll be living here, won't we? Well, yes, but what did she mean by here? If you mean here, he tapped the table, just for a few months. If you mean Evanston, I'd like to stay in town, stay at Aldersgate. Yeah, her words could mean anything. Her tone suggested she approved of the church. Should we be married here? Married at Aldersgate? The wedding, though, was the prerogative of the bride and her family. Clara had some problems with her family, and he didn't know what they were. Well, he was on her side, but she needed a family too. The community offered by Aldersgate was all very well, but the kid was going to need a grandmother to bake cookies for him, and that had to be Clara's mother. Mom and Dad were in Moline. Sure, of course, your parents, your mother especially, will have something to say about that. Maybe. Well, you might have dreams. I don't want to cross them, especially without hearing them. She was only going to have one wedding. It should be, as far as possible, the one she dreamed of. I have something saved up. I was going to go into private practice. That can go towards a wedding. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. I'd like that. Once again, your parents might have some other plans. What do they say about home? What did who say about home? Frost? Home is where? When you have to go there, they have to take you in? That's Frost. Well, when you have to go there, and they take you in, that's home. That was an affirmation of Aldersgate. That was great. She had a history he had no part of in other places. At Aldersgate, she was half of Clara and Eric. Timing is, still assuming you're pregnant, the sooner the better. He should remind her. People will talk. She hadn't liked the reminder. And he knew some of the people who would talk. On the other hand, the choir was a great place for gossip, and they damned well wouldn't gossip about him there. Dennis wasn't the only one conscious of the sexual imbalance. Darling, people will talk anyway. The great thing about gossips is that they find something else to gossip about very soon. When they had finished talking, they shared a long kiss. If her hand stayed on his waist while his wandered her whole torso, her tongue was as venturesome as his was. They shared another kiss, sweet if shorter and less erotic, on her front porch. He restrained himself from calling her Monday and early Tuesday. He parked and came to her door between 5:30 and 6 o'clock Tuesday night. Well, do you have news for me? He asked when he got the car onto Belmont heading east. That was, by far, the better direction to be headed at 6 o'clock. Yeah, I called the doctor's office. He agrees I'm pregnant. Really, I think a rabbit agrees that I'm pregnant. I don't seem to have any venereal disease. We have to get tested, at least get tested for syphilis, for the wedding license. I'll check and see whether that test will fit their bill. Everybody has to get that test. Yeah, I know. Well, she probably knew more people who had been married recently than he did. He just assumed that he was more knowledgeable about statutory requirements, and probably he was in general. That didn't mean that she was ignorant. The ring she selected was a fairly modest one. They got wedding rings, too, and the jeweler fitted them to their fingers. Look, she said when they were back in the car. You're right about telling Mom. Why don't you bring the ring with you when I wrangle an invitation? So they did it that way. They tried an Italian restaurant that time, and he took her home afterwards. Almost their only kiss of the trip was on her front porch. Wednesday, she called him at the office to invite him to her house for dinner on Friday. I'll bring the ring. As his office mate was out, he couldn't be overheard. Do you want me to propose again in front of them? Seems like that's as good a way of telling them as any. Might as well. I love you. Friday, then, 6:30, she replied. Bye. Bye. Well, she'd been in a place where others could overhear. On the other hand, she never said, I care about you to him. If that had been one of his expectations for their relationship, he should have communicated it. And her feelings for him really weren't that deep. He wished she felt more, but he suspected she couldn't. And if she didn't care deeply for him, their relationship was better off without any pretense. On Friday, he got home, shaved, showered, and put on his best suit. He parked near her house and waited until it was nearly time. When she opened the door, she stepped outside, dressed casually for a brief greeting. For people were tense as they stood in the living room and then sat around the large kitchen table. The parents took the ends of the table, and he sat opposite Clara. He couldn't figure out what the seating arrangement was meant to prevent. The meal was good, and he complimented it. Then it was time to talk seriously. He wiped his hands on the napkin before reaching into his inner breast pocket for a small box. He carefully opened it under the table. Clara, may I have your hand? When she gave it, he slipped a ring onto her finger. It was a tight fit over the knuckle, but he managed. Clara Wharton, will you marry me? Yes, Eric Stevens. I will. He turned to the others. Obviously, this isn't the first time I've asked that question, but this is why I insisted on this invitation. Clara and I are engaged. Mrs. Wharton's response surprised him. Did you know she's expecting a child with someone else? Clara's mother was supposed to be supportive. If a defense attorney betrayed a client, he would be reported to the disciplinary board. There was no such committee for parents, but maybe there should be. Yes, Mrs. Wharton, he replied carefully. Clara has told me everything. That is one of the reasons we believe the marriage should happen soon. Well, what do you do? The question came from the father, a more appropriate one than the mother's. He'd already answered it, but was glad to do so again. For work? I'm a prosecutor in traffic court for the state's attorney's office. I handle everything from DUI cases to contested parking tickets. Not many people contest those. Pays well? That depends on your standards. The state's attorney doesn't pay lawyers very high salaries compared to some, but it's a decent income compared to many other jobs. Stable? Are you guaranteed the job? Not guaranteed, but more certain than most. We don't. Even though the state's attorney is an elected post, usually turn over the personnel when the top man changes. Most people who leave the office do so because they think that they can do better. As I say, many lawyers make more. Doesn't make you sound very ambitious. And that was one of his weak points, one which Clara might not know. I'm not. I have looked at becoming a solo practitioner for years. A solo practitioner who really hustles can make more than I make. The guys who really rake in the bucks work for the big partnerships. They've never tried to recruit me, and I can practically guarantee that they never will. But a solo practitioner who spends every hour of every day searching out clients can do very well. Somehow, I didn't see myself doing that. Well, you're talking about supporting a family, now. Don't get me wrong. I make over the median income for a family, let alone a single individual. I'm not starving, and I've put something away. The first year or two of solo practitioner work wouldn't pay the rent. You have to build up the business. So, I've been putting some money away in case I ever quit and go into business for myself. Now he was dithering. But you haven't done that. And her father saw the problem. But I haven't done that. I've read that every newspaper reporter has a novel in his drawer he works on occasionally. Well, everybody in the office with the exception of a few supervisors, and I'm not certain about them, has a business plan for the law office he's going to open using all the experience he's built up in court. You see, most lawyers are consultants. You go to them to draw up a contract or incorporate a business. The guys who actually appear in court are litigators, and we think of ourselves as special. Well, prosecutors are litigators who spend more time in litigation than most defense attorneys do. And the traffic guys spend more time in court than the guys who work on the more serious crimes. That didn't make them, to be honest, better litigators. Of course, there are problems with our experience, too. But we dream of going over to the dark side and making a killing. Not too many of us actually do it. Well, Mrs. Wharton said, you make enough money. Nobody made enough money, but he wasn't going to mention that. Honestly, John, he's an attorney, not a gas station attendant. What I want to know is what you've discussed about the wedding. Not a hell of a lot. I'd like it to be at my church, Aldersgate United Methodist, in Evanston. It's a pretty church, and Clara has been there. There are people who know both of us. Well, I don't know. Honestly, Mom, Clara said. I've been to worship in Aldersgate more than I've been to worship in every other church in the past decade. Well, it's not our church, but it's the church where the minister knows Eric's name. Does the pastor at Portage Park Lutheran know mine? I don't know his. There was more than that. And he wasn't going to let the harridan have her way when Clara wanted what he wanted. If Bob Lawrence doesn't know your name, he said, he's not doing his job. You've been there several times, and while you usually go out the back with the choir, you have gone out the back. They come in the back of the sanctuary, Clara said, and the pastor stands there shaking hands after the service. There is another exit, in the front of the sanctuary which leads into the fellowship hall. Oops. He'd spoken confusingly. So much for boasting of his being a litigator. They call that going out the back. Confused me the first time. Anyway, Eric is right. The last time I shook the pastor's hand, he called me by name. Well, that's no reason to choose someone to marry you, said Mom. It's damn well a reason to choose not to be married by someone. Lots of people get married by pastors they haven't seen before asking him to do the job. Well, lots of people did. Those people, though, weren't in any position to dictate the choice of church. They didn't attend. Mom, Clara said, the kids I went to Sunday school with are scattered to hell and gone. I don't know them anymore, and they don't know me. The kids I went to high school with will come to Evanston if they are in town. They don't know Portage Park Lutheran any better than I do. I have a few friends at Aldersgate, and Eric has more. And I want to have friends there. And that last was the best reason. Sure, he said, plenty of people get married in a church which they will never visit again, standing in front of a minister they will never see again. Those people, excepting a few soldiers and wayfarers, aren't members of a church. I think Clara has found a church home, and I know that I have. It seems to me that you use your church home for that sort of ceremony. Well, her father said, if you're expecting us to pay for a big church wedding. Well, what was really necessary was that her father give the bride away. Eric was prepared to pay for everything if he needed to. I don't see the sense of that, Clara said. The people are going to see my belly bulge in a few months. Why make a spectacle of myself parading down the aisle, all wrapped in white? What are you saying? Mrs. Wharton asked. A good dress, one I already own. One bridesmaid, also in street clothes. A small ceremony. Well, a simple ceremony would be great. One without the church invited would be a mistake. Let's talk later, he said. Well, Mrs. Wharton said, you certainly surprised us. Well, Clara said, dinner is finished. Why don't you and Dad go upstairs while I say goodbye to Eric? Was the discussion finished? It was if Clara said it was. And she might intend saying goodbye to include some communication as well as some kissing. Clara, her dad said. Well, would you rather we went upstairs to say goodbye? Clara asked. Her parents left the table and went up the stairs. He and Clara got up, but stayed downstairs. She got him his overcoat. She's your mother, he told her. You have to forgive her. I'm not sure I ever will. For what? Clara had been angry during the discussion, but she hadn't seemed as perturbed as her mother's betrayal deserved. For telling me that you were pregnant with another man's child. I'd already told you. Yes, and so she should have. But that was her secret to reveal. Yes, and she could well have made sure of that after I'd gone. It would have been one hell of a shock, and not the sort of thing which can be disguised. But you should have told me before you accepted my proposal. There was no excuse on God's green earth for her to tell me. None. I was trying to see where she did you wrong. She betrayed her daughter. She betrayed my future wife. Anyway, is that what you had to speak to me about? He'd said that they would talk later. And the sooner the better. No. Consider this. A simple wedding is great. But the church will expect to be invited. You want their support. Acknowledge their interest. And they notice my bulging belly a couple of months later? Well, were they supposed not to notice it if they hadn't attended the wedding? On the other hand, attending the wedding was some sort of gesture of support. So, they stood in support of you. They, some of them, will still be in support of you. Look, a marriage which begins too late is better than a marriage which ends too early, and they've seen those without fainting. Don't decide now, think about it. And he knew Clara. She would think about it. Sunday, when he offered to drop her off while he found a parking space, she raised her left hand, still in mittens. So they parked and walked back together. She removed her mittens the first thing. It wasn't until they joined Claire and Kurt, though, that they got their first comment. Claire held Clara's hand in both of hers and turned it this way and that while admiring the ring. After church, Joan did the same. Other women joined the admiration contingent as they waited, hand in hand, to shake Reverend Lawrence's hand. He waited to let those without business get out first, and that gave plenty of time for the women to admire the ring. We need to talk to you, he said to Reverend Lawrence when they got there. This week preferably. Well, I try to avoid Monday appointments, and Tuesday is taken. Wednesday? Wednesday evening, Eric said. Clara didn't seem to disagree. Can I pick you up at 6 o'clock? He asked her. Can we have dinner later? Sure. Then let's try for 6:45, he told Reverend Lawrence. We allow half an hour Sunday mornings, but rush hour will slow us down. Reverend Lawrence agreed. What is this? Clara asked when they got to the car, and he was driving her to the restaurant. Why do we have to meet with him? Oops. Information gap. Sorry. If he's going to marry us, and I thought you said you wanted that, then we go in for counseling beforehand. It's something everybody in the church knows, and I forgot that you didn't. So, he has to talk to us before he performs the ceremony? Yeah, and he more or less got that message that it was about a wedding. I clearly said that it was talking with us. We are in US, aren't we? That sounded nice. They were in US. They were a couple. Yeah, and we'll be more so in the future. Which reminds me, we'll keep my apartment through June, right? He'd thought of this before, and then other matters kept being more important. Yeah, so do you want me to get a double bed? Another twin? She thought. It wasn't one of her long considerations, but he could tell she was giving it consideration. A double. Do you want both of us to pick it out? We may need to replace some of my furniture later, but I don't want to get anything now that we'll have to replace again. At some point, they were going to have a household, and she would be the senior partner with respect to the household. At this point, they would be starting in his old apartment. They should transition smoothly. Why don't we go shopping together? Tomorrow? That sounded great. Pick you up at your place, or meet at the county building. He'd be happy picking her up at her place until she moved in after the marriage. On the other hand, shopping would be best in the stores in the South Loop. Driving west from the Loop and back didn't make a whole lot of sense. County building. You get off at 5 o'clock? Officially, he did. He could do it earlier, but she didn't sound pushed. County building. Ground floor elevators. 5 o'clock. She apparently agreed. She may have nodded, but his eyes were on the road. They weren't the best matched couple in terms of ages, but they both seemed willing to shift to accommodate the other. That might well turn out to be more important than being the same age or academic achievement. Dear listeners, next part of this story will be released soon. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.